The wind in Wyoming does not ask permission. It comes straight down from the north, smelling of iron and ice, and it owns everything it touches. It owned the gray wood of Clara's small house. It owned the rattling panes of the windows and the splintered posts of her fence line. It owned the silence she lived in. Clara leaned her weight against the straining fence post, her hands raw inside her thin wool gloves. The cold found every seam. She was trying to anchor the corner post before the ground froze solid for 6 months. But the land was already hard as stone, and she was only one woman. Her strength was not enough. It was never enough. She straightened her back, hearing the crackle of her own spine, and looked out over the flat, brown expanse that led to the town. The town was a mile off, but it might as well have been 100. She saw the dark shape of Mrs. Gable's wagon pulling away from the mercantile. Clara knew that if she had been in town, Mrs. Gable would have tugged her bonnet low and crossed the dirt road, pretending to study a horse's shoe, just to avoid speaking. They all did, ever since Frank died. They crossed the road. They pulled their children inside when she walked by. They looked at her small homestead, set just outside the proper town limits, as if it were cursed. And perhaps it was, cursed by Frank's memory, and cursed by the whispers he left behind. She gave the post one last, frustrated shove. It held, but barely. It would not survive a blizzard. She turned back to the house. Her shoulders slumped. The tasks were endless. The water in the horse trough was a sheet of ice, thick and stubborn. She spent an hour every morning with the heavy end of an axe, just breaking it up so her single, aging mare could drink. The woodpile was shrinking. It was a visible measure of how much time she had left before the real cold, the killing cold, settled in. Her life was measured in chores. Break the ice, check the fence, mend the roof shingles Frank had never bothered to fix, knead the bread, check the fence again. She was scrubbing the trough when she heard the distinct, sharp clop of a buggy, light and fast. It was not a farmer's wagon. Her stomach tightened. She knew that sound. Clara wiped her chapped hands on her apron and stood waiting by the porch. She did not bother to fix her hair, which the wind had already torn from its bun. The buggy stopped. Mrs. Davies, the preacher's wife, sat straight and stiff as a fireplace poker. She did not get down. She held the reins in her gloved hands and looked at Clara's property. Her lips pursed so tight they vanished. "Clara," she said. It was not a greeting. It was an accusation. "Mrs. Davies," Clara's voice was rough from disuse. "The Lord tests us with hardship," Mrs. Davies began, her eyes scanning the sagging porch. "But he expects us to maintain diligence. This place—" She paused, letting the wind fill the silence. "It is an eyesore. It invites speculation." "It is what I have," Clara said, pulling her thin shawl tighter. "It is what he left you." Mrs. Davies's eyes were sharp. "And the town has been patient. Clara, we have been charitable. We overlooked the unpleasantness of your husband's passing. We allowed you to stay here, on the edge of decency." Clara said nothing. She tasted ash in her mouth. She remembered Frank's passing very well. She remembered the smell of the whiskey and the sound of his heavy boots stumbling on the rug. She remembered the sickening crack when his head hit the stone hearth. She had just stood there for a full minute, watching the dark stain spread on the floor, before she had even thought to scream. The preacher's wife leaned forward, her voice dropping, though there was no one for a mile to hear. "The cold season is coming. The railroad brings all sorts of men, drifters, laborers, men without God in their hearts. A woman alone. Clara, a woman with a reputation, must be doubly vigilant." "Vigilant against what? Mrs. Davies?" The woman's nostrils flared. "Against temptation, against idleness, against the very appearance of sin. The town will not tolerate more scandal from this house. You are to keep decent. You are to keep to yourself. Do you understand me?" The warning was clear. Do not take in travelers. Do not hire a ranch hand. Do not, under any circumstances, Allow a man to be seen here. They had branded her. She was the widow who drove her husband to drink. She was the widow who, perhaps, had not just let him fall, but pushed him. They could not prove it. The sheriff had come, asked his questions, looked at the bruises on her arms. Bruises Frank had put there 2 nights before, and then looked at Frank's body. He had called it an accident, but his eyes said something else. Ever since, she was poison. No man had stayed near. The few hands she had tried to hire to fix the roof saw the way the town looked at her, and they were gone by morning. "I understand," Clara whispered to Mrs. Davies. "See that you do." "Mrs." Davies snapped the reins. The buggy turned in a sharp, cruel circle, churning the dusty yard, and sped back toward the clean, righteous houses of the town. Clara stood there until the sound was gone, leaving only the endless, cold wind. She closed her eyes. She hated them. She hated their charity, and she hated their suspicion. But most of all, she hated the silence Frank had left behind, a silence bigger and colder than the Wyoming sky. She went back to the fence. She worked until her hands were bleeding, the warm blood freezing sticky on her gloves. She did not stop until the sun began to dip, staining the brown hills a deep, bruised purple. It was in that fading light that she saw him. He was not on the road. He was just standing at the edge of her property, near the broken gate, as if he had materialized from the dust. Clara's heart jumped into her throat. He was a stranger, tall, broad, and standing with a stillness that was unsettling. He wore a heavy canvas coat, worn thin at the elbows, and boots that looked like they had walked 1,000 miles. They were the kind of boots the state issued, the kind men wore when they walked away from prison roads. He just watched her. He was not looking at her with pity, like the preacher, or with judgment, like his wife. He was just looking. She picked up the heavy hammer she had been using on the post. She held it at her side. He saw the movement but did not react. He just raised one hand, slow. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was low and gravelly, like stones rolling in a dry creek bed. She did not answer. He pointed, not at the house, but at the wood pile. "Saw you from the road. That axe work is slow, and your pile is low for this time of year." Clara's grip tightened on the hammer. "I manage." "Not for long. You will not." He took a step closer. "Just one. I am looking for work." She finally saw his face clearly in the dusk. He was sun-darkened, his features stark. A scar, white and puckered, ran from the corner of his left eye down across his cheek, ending at the line of his jaw. It was an old wound, but a bad one. His hands were huge and rough, scarred from more than just labor. "I have no pay," she said, her voice flat. "Keep moving." The man nodded, accepting this, but he did not move. His eyes drifted from the woodpile to the sagging porch roof. "I'm not asking for pay, ma'am. Just a plate, a hot meal." Clara hesitated. "Mrs." Davies's words echoed in her ears. The town will not tolerate it. But the woodpile was low, the fence was broken, and the man in front of her, despite the scar and the prison boots, had an exhaustion in his eyes that she recognized. It was the same exhaustion she saw in the mirror every morning. "You chop," she said, pointing with the hammer toward the pile. "You fill the wood box on the porch. I will feed you. Then you go." "Yes, ma'am." He did not smile. He did not bargain. He just walked past her, giving her a wide berth. He picked up the axe she had left by the stump. He tested the weight of it, ran a thumb over the dull blade. He looked at the grindstone by the barn, then back at her. "Go on," she said, feeling defensive. "It's all I have." He just nodded. He spat on his rough hands, gripped the handle, and raised the axe. The first swing was clean and powerful. The sound of it, thwack, was sharp and final in the cold air. Clara watched for a moment. He did not swing with anger. He swung with a steady metronome rhythm. Thwack, split, thwack, Split! It was the sound of work. Honest work. She went inside, her skin prickling. She did not just latch the door, she barred it. From the kitchen window, she watched him. He worked without stopping. As the darkness fell, he did not slow. He just became a shadow, marked by the rhythmic rise and fall of the axe. She turned to her stove. She had beans and a bit of sow-belly. She made coffee, thick and black. It was more than she would have eaten herself. But the sound of the chopping continued, steady as a heartbeat, and she did not stop him. The memory of Frank rose up, sour and hot. Frank hated chores. He would let the wood rot before he would chop it. He would sit at the table, his face flushed with whiskey, and bellow for her to fix things. And when she could not, when the fence broke or the roof leaked, his heavy hand would find her. The sound of his violence was sloppy and wet, the sound of things breaking. This new sound, the thwack, split, was clean. It was the sound of something being built, not destroyed. After an hour, the steady rhythm stopped. She looked out. The wood box on the porch, which she had not been able to fill in a month, was stacked high and neat. The stranger, Eli, was standing by the porch steps, brushing sawdust from his coat. He did not approach the door. He just stood, waiting in the cold. Clara unbarred the door. The wall of cold air hit her. She carried a tin plate of beans and meat and a steaming mug of coffee. She did not invite him in. She set it on the porch rail. He looked at the food, then at her. His eyes, in the lantern light from her window, were a strange, clear gray. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. His name was Eli. He had told her that when he first arrived. Eli. It was a short, hard name. He sat on the bottom step, turning his back slightly to the wind, and began to eat. He ate like he worked, steadily, without rushing, but without stopping. Clara stood in the doorway, the hammer still near her hand. "Where are you headed?" she asked, needing to fill the silence. He swallowed. "West. Heard there is work in the valleys. Building." "You are a long way from the valleys." "Yes, ma'am." He did not elaborate. He did not complain about the cold. He just ate. The stiffness between them was thick as ice, but it was not the jagged ice of Mrs. Davies's visit. It was something else, a shared understanding of the cold. "Those boots," she said, before she could stop herself. He paused, the spoon halfway to his mouth. He looked down at his feet. "They get a man where he is going." "Where did you get them?" He looked up, and his gray eyes met hers. The scar on his cheek seemed to pull tighter. "I served 4 years. For theft." Clara flinched. She had expected him to lie. The honesty of it startled her more than the crime. "I did not do it," he said quietly, looking back at his plate. "But I was there, and I would not name the man who did. So I served the time." He finished the beans, scraping the plate clean. He drank the coffee in 3 long gulps. He stood up and placed the plate and mug carefully on the railing. "That was a good meal, ma'am. I thank you for it. I will go now." He turned to walk away, back into the blackness he had come from. Clara looked at the woodpile, stacked high. She looked at the sky. The wind had picked up, and it was moaning now, a high, thin sound that meant a storm was close. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees since he arrived. "Wait!" she called out. He stopped, his back to her. "The storm," she said, her voice thin. "It is coming in fast. You will not make it to town." He turned slowly. "I have slept in worse." "The barn," she said, the words tumbling out before she could catch them. "The loft is dry. There are blankets. You can stay in the barn. The town will not tolerate it." Eli stared at her. He seemed to be weighing her offer, looking for the trap in it. In his world, there was likely always a trap. "Just the barn," she said, her voice hardening. "And you are gone by first light, before the town wakes." He gave a single, sharp nod. The barn, thank you. He walked toward the barn, his shoulders set against the rising wind. Clara watched him go, then quickly gathered the plate and mug and retreated inside. The wind hit the house 5 minutes later. It was not a breeze, it was a physical blow. The windows rattled so hard she thought the glass would shatter. The front door strained against its hinges. A sudden, violent crash of wood came from the front. A shutter had torn loose and was slamming against the house. Clara cried out. Startled, she ran to the window. The shutter was flailing, threatening to break the glass. Before she could even think what to do, Eli's dark shape was there, emerging from the barn into the teeth of the gale. He fought the wind, wrestling the heavy wooden shutter. He held it in place, the wind tearing at him, but he could not secure it from the outside. He looked at the door. Clara's heart hammered. She ran to the door, fumbling with the bar. She pulled it open, and the wind screamed into her house, extinguishing her lantern, plunging the room into darkness. "The bolt!" he yelled over the noise. "It's inside!" She backed away as he pushed into the room, shoving the shutter into place. He was a massive shadow in her small parlor. He smelled of the storm, of pine and ice and something else, something male and real. He fumbled in the dark for the interior bolt. She heard him curse softly as he found it and dropped the heavy iron bar into place. The sound of the storm was instantly muffled, though the wind still howled. They stood in the pitch-black room, breathing hard. He was only feet from her. "It will hold now," he said. His voice was too loud in the sudden quiet. "Yes," she whispered. He needed to get to the other windows. One by one, they moved through her small home. She lit a match, her hand trembling, and relit the lantern. In its glow, she saw him clearly. Sawdust clung to his dark hair. His face was set, focused on the task. They worked together, securing the last 2 shutters. It was fast, efficient, and silent, save for the wind. When it was done, he stood by the door again, ready to return to the barn. "The barn door will not hold in this," she said. "The latch is weak." He looked at her. The question hung in the air. "You can stay in here," she said. The words felt strange and heavy. "On the floor, by the fire." She expected him to argue, or to refuse. He just nodded again. That same sharp gesture. "If it is all the same, ma'am, I would prefer the barn. It is safer." She was not sure if he meant safer for him, or for her. "As you wish," she said, stiffly. He opened the door just enough to slip out. The wind ripped it from his hand, slamming it open. He caught it, forced it shut against the pressure, and was gone. Clara stood with her back to the door, shaking. She slid the heavy bar into place. The sound of the lock clicking shut was the loudest sound she had ever heard. She stared at the wood of the door for a long, long time. The house was secure. The windows were shuttered. The man was in the barn. She was safe, but she was afraid. The fear was an old, familiar animal. It was Frank's fear, the fear of a man's presence, of his strength, of what he might do in the dark. But beneath the fear was something else, a low, sharp tremor that was not the wind. It was temptation. He was just yards away. He was a convict, a stranger, a scarred man. But he had fixed her fence. He had chopped her wood. He had shuttered her windows and asked for nothing but a plate of beans. She backed away from the door and went to her bedroom. The room was cold. Her bed was a narrow, empty rectangle in the dark. She slipped under the cold sheets, her clothes still on, and pulled the quilt up to her chin. The wind screamed. It was a lonely, childless sound. Clara stared at the shadows on the ceiling. She thought of the empty space beside her in the bed, an emptiness that had been there for 2 years, an emptiness that had been there, in truth, even when Frank was alive. She was so cold. She whispered to the shadows, to the howling storm, to the empty half of her mattress. She did not say it to God. He had stopped listening long ago. She did not say it to the stranger in the barn. She said it to the profound, aching emptiness of her own life. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I just want warmth." She turned onto her side, curling into herself, tears freezing on her cheeks. "I just want a child." She said no names. There was no name to say. There was just the wind, and the cold, and the locked door. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving the world scoured and quiet. The wind died as if it had never been, and a brittle, piercing cold settled over the land. Clara woke from a fitful sleep on the floor by the cold hearth, the bar still across her door. She had not dared go to her bed. She rose, her body stiff, and went to the window. She expected the yard to be empty. She expected him to be a dark shape already miles down the road, vanished with the gale. He was not. He was standing by the barn, resetting the big door, which the wind had torn from its top hinge. He had found her tools in the shed and was working with a patient, focused economy, his breath pluming in the air. He had already broken the ice in the horse trough. Clara watched him for a full minute. He did not look toward the house. He just worked. She unbarred the door. The sound of it seemed to echo in the thin air. He heard it and paused, looking at her across the yard. He did not smile. He did not move. He just waited, the hammer in his hand. Clara pulled her shawl tight. "I am making coffee," she called out. Her voice was too loud. There is breakfast, if you want it." He gave that same short nod. He turned back to the hinge. She cooked oatmeal and fried the last of the bacon. She set a plate and a mug on the porch railing, just as she had the night before. When he finally came, he was carrying a section of the roof, a triangle of splintered shingles and warped board. "This tore loose," he said, setting it down. "It let the wind into the loft. That is why the hinge broke, the pressure from inside." She looked at the heavy piece of debris. "I did not even hear it." "It was loud," he said. He looked at the plate. He did not eat on the step this time. He stood by the rail, eating quickly, his eyes on the roof line. "I have no money to pay for that," she said, gesturing at the hole he had exposed. "I know." He finished the oatmeal. "You have shingles in the shed. Enough. But the frame under it is rotted. It needs replacing." "I cannot," she started. "I will fix it," he said. It was not an offer. It was a statement. The work for the food. It is a fair trade. He finished his coffee and handed her the empty mug. He did not wait for an answer. He walked to the shed, pulled out her rickety ladder, and climbed onto the roof. And so Eli stayed. The first days were a silent negotiation. He slept in the barn. He woke before the sun, and the sound of his work was the first thing she heard. He ate on the porch. He never came inside unless she handed him something through the door. He was a ghost who fixed things. He was silent, but his work was a conversation. The roof was mended, the new shingles straight and true. The rotting porch step was replaced with a solid, level plank. He moved on to the fence line, the one she had bled over. He did not just prop it up. He dug new post holes, deeper than she ever could, setting the posts with a permanence that stunned her. He was respectful. He never spoke of the night of the storm. He never asked why she had no neighbors visiting. He never asked where her husband was buried. When she went to town for flour and salt, riding her mare past him, he would just nod, his eyes following her until she was on the main road. When she returned, the town's silent judgment clinging to her like dust, he would be there, chopping. The wood pile grew from a small, panicked stack into a fortress, a long, high wall of split logs that promised warmth, promised survival. The silence between them began to change. It was no longer the stiff, brittle silence of two strangers. It became a shared space. It was the silence of the prairie itself, vast and watchful, but not unkind. Clara found herself leaving the kitchen door open while she baked, just to hear the steady rhythm of his hammer. She made extra stew, and he began to eat at the small, rough table on the porch, instead of standing. One evening, she brought 2 mugs of coffee out. The air was sharp, and the sun was setting in a blaze of orange that made the hills look like they were on fire. He was sitting on the steps, cleaning grease from a wagon axle he had found and was repairing. She handed him a mug. He took it, his calloused fingers brushing hers. It was the first time they had touched since the night of the storm. A jolt, small and sharp, went through her. She sat on the top step, a few feet away. "The winters here are hard," she said, just to say something. "I have seen hard winters. Not like this. The wind, it gets inside your head. After a few months, you start to hear things in it." He looked at her. "What things?" "Voices," she whispered, staring into her mug. "People you used to know, people you wish you had known." She hesitated, and sometimes just screaming, like the wind is trying to pull the house apart. He nodded slowly. "It is not the wind, it is the loneliness. It makes a man's mind bend." She looked up, surprised. "You have been that lonely?" "In prison," he said, his voice flat. "There are 100 men around you, and the loneliness is so thick you cannot breathe. It is louder than any wind." She had never heard him speak so many words at once. "That is why you left," she said, "why you keep moving." "I am moving toward work. Ma'am, you are running from the loneliness." He did not deny it. He just drank his coffee. The small confession opened a door. A few nights later, she found him by the corral, looking at her old mare. "She is lame in the front left," he said. "I know, she is old." "It is not just age. Her hoof is split." He crouched, and to Clara's amazement, the mare, usually so skittish, let him lift her foot. "She needs a new shoe, and this crack needs pine tar." "The blacksmith in town." Clara stopped. She could not go to the blacksmith. He was Mr. Gable's brother. "I can set a shoe," Eli said, "if you have one, and a rasp." She had Frank's old tools in the shed. They were rusty. Eli spent the next day cleaning them, sharpening the rasp, finding a shoe that fit. He built a small fire and reshaped the iron, the clang, clang, clang of his hammer on the metal ringing through the yard. He was gentle with the mare, his low voice calming her as he worked. That night, she brought his plate. "You are good with your hands," she said. "It is all I have," he replied. "This place, it was falling apart," she said, the words tumbling out, quiet and bitter. "I could not keep up. Frank, my husband, he did not care for mending things. He only cared for other things." Eli stopped eating. He looked at her, his face in the shadow. He did not pry. He just waited. "He drank," she said, the shameful word finally spoken aloud. "He drank, and he broke things, the fence, the chairs, me." Eli's jaw tightened. The scar on his cheek stood out, white against his skin. "The town thinks I killed him," she whispered. "They think I finally hit him back." "Did you?" Eli's voice was not accusing. It was just a question. "No, he was drunk. He fell. He hit his head on the hearth." She was shaking. "I watched him. I did not help him right away. I just watched. And that, in their eyes, is the same as murder." Eli put his plate down. He stood up. Clara flinched, expecting him to walk away. She had said too much. She had driven him off, just like all the others. He walked past her, onto the porch. He picked up the broken rocking chair, the one Frank had smashed against the wall. "Where is the wood glue?" he asked. For 2 days, he worked on the chair in his spare time, carefully fitting the splintered pieces back together, binding them with rope until the glue set. When he was done, he placed it by the wood stove, whole again. Clara touched the smooth, mended arm. She had not sat in that chair since before Frank died. A strange, fragile domesticity settled on the homestead. He was still in the barn, she in the house, but the space between them was shrinking. The weather turned warm, a false summer before the real winter. The heat was heavy, and the air was still. Eli was digging the last of the post holes for the corral, the work hard and slow in the packed earth. Clara was in the kitchen, her hands deep in bread dough. The window was open. She saw him pause. He was sweating, his shirt dark and clinging to his back. He pulled it off, wiping his face with it. Clara's hands stopped moving in the dough. She watched him. He was lean, but powerful. His back was a map of hard work, the muscles shifting under his sun-darkened skin as he lifted the heavy post-hole digger. She saw the scars, a long, thin one that wrapped around his ribs, a star-shaped pucker on his shoulder. These were not scars from prison. These were older, deeper. He turned, reaching for his canteen, and she saw his chest, broad and clear. He was not a soft man. He was a man made of hard lines and old wounds. A feeling, hot and sharp, shot through Clara. It was a deep, physical pull that made her blush. Right there in her own kitchen, she felt a wave of guilt. Mrs. Davies's voice was in her ear. Scandal, decency. But the guilt was quickly swallowed by something else. A profound, aching hunger. It was not just for a man. It was for life. It was the ache of her empty bed, of her empty arms, of her silent house. He was alive. He was strong. And he was right there. She turned away from the window, her heart hammering. She punched the dough with a sudden, violent motion. That night, the tension was a living thing. He came inside to eat, as he had started to do now that the evenings were cold. He washed his face and hands at the pump, his hair wet and dark. They sat at the small kitchen table. The stew steamed between them. The only sounds were their spoons. She kept looking at his hands. They were clean, but the nails were short, and the knuckles were scarred. They were the hands that had fixed her roof and her chair, the hands that had been so gentle with the mare. She gathered her courage. It felt like stepping off a cliff. "Eli," she said. He looked up. Did you ever want children?" He stopped, his spoon halfway to his mouth. He did not look away, but his eyes went distant. He put the spoon down. He stared at the table, at the grain of the wood. "Did once," he said. His voice was rough. "A long time ago, before prison? Before I knew what I was." He traced the line of a crack in the wood with his finger. "I got scared. Scared of becoming my father." He said nothing else. He did not need to. Clara knew that fear. It was the same fear she had lived with, the fear of Frank's heavy boot, of his whiskey-soaked rage. Eli was afraid of the man whose blood ran in his own veins. It was the saddest thing she had ever heard. They finished the meal in that heavy silence. The connection between them was no longer about work and food. It was something deeper. They were two people marked by the violence of others. Clara stood to clear the plates. Her hands were shaking. She could not stop them. She saw him watching her hands, his brow furrowed. She almost dropped a bowl. She set the plates down on the counter with a clatter. She could not do this. She could not pretend anymore. She could not go back to that cold, empty bed. Not after seeing him, not after talking to him, not with him sitting right there, breathing the same air. She turned around. He was watching her, his gray eyes wary, guarded. He was waiting for the trap. "I will give you a child tonight," she said. The words hung in the air, shocking and stark. Eli went perfectly still. His entire body became rigid, as if he were bracing for a blow. His eyes narrowed. He looked past her, toward the door, then back at her. This was it, the moment it all went wrong, the moment the woman made her demand, or her accusation. He looked at her, searching for the madness, or the joke, or the trap. He saw only terror and a desperate, unblinking honesty. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice a low rasp. "I saw you today," she whispered, her face burning. I am so tired of this house being empty. I am so tired of being cold." She saw the suspicion warring with confusion in his face. She took a step toward the table. Her hand, her whole arm, was trembling so hard she had to grip the back of her own chair. "It is a sin," she said, the words spilling out. "What I'm asking, I know it. Mrs. Davies, the preacher, they would have me run out, but I do not care about them. I just care about the silence. And you." She looked at him. "You are a good man, Eli. You fix things. You are quiet. And your father, you are not him. You are not." He still did not move. He was a stone. She took the final step. She reached out her shaking hand, not to touch him, but to lay it flat on the wooden table between them. Her palm was damp, her fingers splayed. It was a surrender. "I am not asking you to stay," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "I am not asking for promises. I am not setting a trap. I am just asking for one night, for the chance. I will give you a child, if you want one." He stared at her trembling hand on the table. He saw the chapped skin, the broken nails from her work. He looked at her face, streaked with tears, her eyes wide with fear and a terrible, raw longing that echoed his own. He had been in jail for 4 years. He had been alone his whole life. He had been shown kindness so rarely. He no longer recognized it. But this was not kindness. It was desperation. It was a woman offering the only thing she had left, to a man who had nothing. Slowly, as if lifting a great weight, he lifted his own hand. He covered her trembling one with his. The warmth was a shock. His hand was rough, calloused, but so warm. Her breath hitched. He stood up, pulling her hand with him, gently until she was standing too. He did not kiss her. He did not say a word. He just looked into her eyes, and for the first time, the guard was gone. She saw only the profound, aching loneliness he carried. He kept hold of her hand and led her from the kitchen. He blew out the lantern, plunging the parlor into shadow. He led her to her bedroom. The room was cold. The bed was neatly made. He stopped, still holding her hand, as if asking a final question. She reached up with her free hand and touched the scar on his cheek. Her fingers were light as a moth's wing. He closed his eyes. It was fumbling and awkward at first. The buttons on her simple dress were small, and his large, rough fingers struggled with them. She tried to help him, but her own hands were shaking too badly. He finally made a low sound of frustration and gently tore the fabric. The sound of the ripping cloth made them both freeze. It was the sound of Frank. Clara flinched and pulled back. "No," Eli whispered, his voice thick. He did not grab her. He just placed his hands on her shoulders. "It is all right. It is just cloth." He was gentle. His touch was not a taking. It was a question. He removed her dress, his hands barely grazing her skin. She stood before him in her thin chemise, shivering, more from fear than cold. He touched her hair, smoothing it back from her face. Then he bent and kissed her. It was not a passionate kiss. It was soft, and it tasted of coffee and salt and loneliness. He picked her up, as if she weighed nothing, and laid her on the bed. He undressed himself in the darkness, and then he was beside her, under the cold sheets. The warmth of his skin was overwhelming. She had not felt another person's warmth in so long. She almost wept from it. He touched her face, her neck, her shoulders. His hands were hesitant, respectful. It was a world away from the bruising, drunken carelessness of her husband. And then, as she let out a breath she had been holding for 2 years, she wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled him close. The gentleness broke. It became what it truly was, a desperate, drowning need. 2 broken people, starving for contact, clinging to the only warmth they had found in a frozen world. It was not love. It was more raw than that. It was survival. It was a prayer against the dark, a defiance of the cold, a desperate attempt to create life in a place that held only death. It was needful, and it was rough, and it was real. Afterward, they lay in the tangled sheets, their bodies slick with sweat, the silence of the room roaring around them. The wind had picked up outside, moaning around the corners of the house. Clara was the first to move. She felt a sudden, sharp panic. He would leave. He would get dressed and walk out, disgusted or finished. She could not bear it. She turned and curled against his side, fitting her body into his, laying her head on his chest. She could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart under her ear. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. She whispered, her lips moving against his warm skin, so he would feel the words, not just hear them. "I do not expect you to stay." Eli lay on his back, staring at the dark ceiling. His arm was wrapped around her, his hand resting on the tangled mass of her hair. He did not answer. He did not know what to say. He only knew that the crushing weight of loneliness, the cold he had carried inside him since prison, was gone. For this one night, he was not cold. He was not alone. He held her tighter and closed his eyes. He woke before her. Clara had been sleeping a dead, heavy sleep, the first true sleep in 2 years, and she woke to the smell of coffee. Her eyes opened. She was in her bed. She was alone. The space beside her was empty, but the pillow still held the faint indentation of his head. She sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. The house was quiet, save for the crackle of a fresh fire in the hearth. Panic, sharp and cold, seized her. He was gone. He had taken what she offered, and he had vanished before the sun. Shame, hot and acidic, rose in her throat. She threw the blankets off and ran to the parlor. He was there. He was not by the fire. He was by the door, his canvas coat on, his hat in his hands. He had his bedroll at his feet. He was looking at the door, at the bar she had locked against him, as if he did not know what to do next. He heard her and turned. His face was a mask. The scar on his cheek was dark in the morning light. They just stared at each other. The air was so thick, so charged, it was hard to breathe. The memory of the night, the desperation, the warmth, the feeling of his skin against hers, was a third person in the room. "The coffee is hot," he said. His voice was low, careful. "You are leaving," she stated. It was not a question. The shame was suffocating her. Eli looked down at his hat, turning the brim in his rough hands. "That was the arrangement. I stay in the barn. I work, I leave." "You did not stay in the barn," she whispered, her hands finding her own arms, gripping them tight. His eyes met hers. "No?" He looked at the door, then back at her. He seemed to be fighting a war inside himself. He took a step toward the door, then stopped. He let out a long breath. "The fence," he said, as if it were an answer. "The south line is still weak, and that mare, her other hoof, needs trimming." Clara did not move. She did not dare to hope. He dropped his hat and his bedroll on the floor. I will move my things inside. The barn is too cold. The loft is still leaking." He was not leaving. He did not move into her room. He did not ask to. He laid his bedroll by the hearth, on the floor, in the same spot where she had slept in fear. He had reclaimed his spot in the barn, but he had given her the house, and now they would share it. They did not speak of that night. They did not touch, but everything had changed. The wall between them, the one of proprietor and vagrant, was gone. The new silence was not empty. It was full of unspoken things. It was the low hum of a wire pulled tight. Their connection, which had started with work, deepened through gestures. In the morning, she would have his coffee ready. He would drink it at the table, and he would watch her as she kneaded dough, his eyes quiet and steady. When he came in from the cold, his hands raw from mending the wire fence, she would have a bowl of hot water waiting. She would hand him the soap. He found a pair of Frank's old leather gloves, stiff and cracked. He spent an evening by the fire with saddle grease, working the leather, his large hands patient, until the gloves were soft. He left them on the table for her. They were too big, but they were warmer than anything she owned. One afternoon, she was trying to split a log that was too green. She swung the axe with all her strength, missed, and the handle slammed into her shin. She cried out, more in frustration than pain. He was there in an instant, taking the axe from her hand. "You swing from the shoulder," he said, his voice gruff. "Not the back. Let the axe do the work." He split the log in one clean motion. Later, at the table, he saw her rubbing her leg. He left and came back with a clean rag soaked in ice-cold water from the pump. He knelt on the floor and gently, his touch firm, pressed the compress to her bruised shin. She froze, her breath catching. He did not look up. He just held it there until the throbbing stopped. "Thank you," she whispered. He just nodded. They lived this way for a week. Then they were two planets in a small, gravitational orbit, close but never colliding. The charge in the air was constant. She would watch him from the kitchen window, his back straight as he worked. He would watch her as she hung laundry, the wind whipping her skirts, her face turned up to the pale sun. The town did not wait long. Clara was feeding the chickens when she heard the horse. It was not Eli. He was a mile out, checking her weak fence line. This was a heavy horse, moving at a purposeful walk. Sheriff Brody. He reined in his horse, his gaze sweeping the homestead. He saw the new fence. He saw the fortress of firewood. He saw the smoke rising clean and straight from the chimney. His eyes, small and hard as pellets, settled on Clara. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat. He did not get down. "Sheriff," Clara said, her hands tight in her apron. "Place is looking improved," he said. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust, dangerously close to her boot. "The work needs doing." "That it does." He shifted in his saddle. "That man, Eli, he's still here?" "He is working for his board," she said, her voice tight. "Working hard, looks like." The sheriff leaned forward, resting one arm on his saddle horn. His voice dropped. "Mrs. Miller Clara, I'm going to talk plain. The town is worried. Mrs. Davies is concerned. You are a widow. You are alone. And you have taken in a drifter, a convict." "He told me," Clara said, lifting her chin. "Did he?" The sheriff smiled, a thin, unpleasant expression. "Did he tell you he served 4 years hard time? Did he tell you he was part of a crew that robbed a payroll? Did he tell you that men like him, they do not change? Clara, they are like a wolf that gets a taste for chickens. They might act tame for a spell, but they are always a wolf." "He has been respectful," she said, but her voice wavered. "Respectful," he scoffed. "He is biding his time. He is in your house." "Is he not?" Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "He sleeps by the fire. He is a gentleman." "There is no such thing as a gentleman convict." The sheriff's eyes went cold. "A horse was stolen from the Bar T Ranch 3 nights ago. A good mare, just vanished." "Eli was here," Clara said quickly. "He was here all night. He did not leave." "You sure of that? You watch him every minute." He looked at her, his gaze lingering, insolent. "How well do you watch him, Clara?" She felt the burning blush of shame. "He was here." "I am just warning you," the sheriff said, gathering his reins. "The town will not stand for more trouble from this place. You tell your man to move on. If I see him after the end of the week, I will run him in for vagrancy. Or maybe I will pin that stolen horse on him. It would not be hard. A man with his past. He tipped his hat again. You get rid of him. It is for your own good. He rode away, leaving her shaking in the yard. When Eli returned at dusk, he knew something was wrong. She was pale, and the supper was scorched. They ate in silence. The new, comfortable silence was gone. The old, stiff silence was back. He was here, she said finally, her plate untouched. Sheriff Brody. Eli did not stop eating. He just nodded. I saw his tracks. He said a horse was stolen. I did not steal it. He said men like you do not change. Eli put his fork down. He looked at his hands, then at her. He is right. I am the same man I was when I went in. I was not a thief then. I am not one now. He knew all about it, she whispered. The payroll. I told you I served the time, Eli said, his voice flat. You did not tell me why, she said, a new strength in her voice. You said you would not name the man. Why? Why protect someone who let you rot in prison? Eli looked into the fire. The light flickered across his scar. His name was Jed. We had worked the railroad together. He had a wife, 2 little girls. The smallest one, she was sick. The doctors cost money. He saw the payroll box. Eli's voice was low, rough. He was not a bad man. He was just desperate. He took it. I was standing right there. When the marshals came, he looked at me, and I saw his little girl's face. She had these big, scared eyes. He shrugged, as if it were nothing. I had no one. He had them. What was I supposed to do? Send him to prison? Let his family fall apart? It was just time. 4 years. I could do the time. He could not. Clara stared at him. She had lived her whole life among men who took, men like Frank, who took her peace, men like the preacher, who took her dignity, men like the sheriff, who wanted to take her last shred of hope. And here was a man who had given 4 years of his life for a friend. Oh, Eli, she breathed. Do not, he said, his voice sharp. I do not want your pity. It is not pity, she said. She stood up and came around the table. She did not touch him. She just stood near him. The sheriff says you have to be gone by the end of the week. He says he will run you in. Eli nodded. I figured as much. He thinks he is protecting me. Clara let out a laugh, a dry, bitter sound. He thinks you are the danger. She looked at her bed, at the sturdy wooden posts at each corner. He is wrong, she said. Men like you, I do not know any men like you. But men like Frank, they do not change. Eli looked up at her. He hurt you. He did more than hurt me. The dam inside her finally broke. The secret she had held. The one that made the town's whispers feel like a judgment she deserved. Spilled out. It was the winter before he died, she said, her voice hollow, her eyes fixed on the bedpost. He had been drinking for a week. He imagined things. He said I smiled at the clerk at the mercantile. He said I was shaming him, that I was a loose woman. He came home that night full of whiskey and rage. She walked over and touched the bedpost. The wood was smooth. He had harness leather. From the barn, he tied my wrists. He tied me to this post. Right here. Eli had gone pale. He looked frozen. I begged him. He just laughed. He said he would teach me to be a proper wife. And then he just left. He went back to the saloon. He left me here, tied, standing. She was shaking violently now, but her voice was cold and clear. It got so cold. My arms. I thought my arms would fall off. I stood here all night. I could not sit. I could not move. I just stood, and I got so cold. She was weeping, silent tears tracking down her face. When he came back, the sun was up. He was still drunk. He looked at me like he had forgotten I was there. He laughed. He cut me down. My wrists they were raw. He never said a word about it. He just went to sleep. She wrapped her arms around herself. That is the man the sheriff protected. That is the man the town misses." Eli stood up. He did not move toward her. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. He looked like he was going to hit something. He looked at the bedpost, and a low, animal sound came from his throat. Clara flinched, terrified. She saw Frank. Eli saw her flinch. He saw the terror in her eyes. The rage in his face crumbled, replaced by a terrible, shared pain. He visibly forced his hands to unclench. "I am not him," he whispered. "I know," she whispered back. The snows began 2 days later. It was not a gentle snow. The outline had called it a spring blizzard, and it was. The weather had warmed, teasing the ground, and then the sky turned a dark, bruised gray. The wind came back, howling like a mourner, and it brought a wall of white. It was not snow, it was a horizontal, blinding force. For 3 days, the world vanished. They were trapped in the small cabin, the wind screaming, the snow piling up against the door, covering the windows, burying the house. The world shrank to the 4 walls, the sound of the storm, and each other. The cabin fever set in fast. They could not work. They could only pace. The small space, the constant, shrieking wind, the enforced closeness, it wore on them. It scraped their nerves raw. The old ghosts came back. On the 3rd night, Clara screamed. It was not a cry. It was a raw, lung-bursting shriek of pure terror. Eli, asleep by the hearth, was on his feet in an instant, his heart pounding. He ran to her bed. She was thrashing, fighting the blankets, her eyes wide open but seeing nothing. "No!" she screamed. "Get him off! Frank, let me go! Let me go!" "Clara!" Eli grabbed her shoulders. "Clara, wake up! It is me! It is Eli!" She struck him. Her fist connected with his jaw, a blind, panicked blow. "Get away from me! Do not touch me!" He recoiled, not from the pain, but from the look on her face. It was the same terror she had described. She was not seeing him. She was seeing her husband. She was back at that bedpost. He backed away, his hands raised. "Clara, it is just a dream. You are safe." She collapsed back into the pillows, sobbing, pulling the blankets up to her chin, her eyes still wide and staring at him as if he were the devil. He stood there for a long moment, his face a mask of old pain. Then he turned, grabbed his coat, and went outside. The wind tore at him, but he did not seem to notice. He sat on the porch, the snow piling up on his shoulders, and just stared into the white wall of the storm. Clara's sobs quieted. She heard the wind, and she knew he was gone. She got up, her legs shaking, and looked out the window. She saw him sitting there, a dark lump in the swirling snow. She saw the bottle. It was Frank's, the one she had hidden under the sink. He had found it. He was drinking. Her heart broke. The sheriff was right. They were all the same. The fight, when it came, was inevitable. It had been building since the storm began. The next day, the wind was still high. They had not spoken since her nightmare. Eli had come in, his face grim, and sat by the fire, sharpening a knife, the shing, shing, shing of the stone grating on her nerves. Clara was standing at the window, staring at the endless, suffocating white. "When are you leaving?" she asked. Her voice was flat. "Dead." Eli stopped sharpening the knife. "What are you talking about? We are snowed in." "After," she snapped, turning on him. "After the snow melts, you are leaving, are you not?" "I told you, the sheriff—" "It is not the sheriff," she cried, the words tearing out of her. "It is you. You got what you wanted. You got a warm bed. You got food. You used me. Just like he did. Just like all of them." "Clara, that is not true." He stood up, his face dark. "Is it not? You drink his whiskey. You sit there in his chair." She was weeping now. Hot, angry tears. "You are just biding your time until the road is clear. You are going to leave. You are going to leave me here." "You think that is what this is?" he roared, his own control snapping. The accusation hit him where he was weakest. "You think I am him? After what you told me? You look at me and you see him." "I see a man with a bottle," she screamed. "I see a man who is going to walk away." "Fine," he yelled. The word was a shot in the small room. He was hurt, his pride and his own fragile hope shattered. "You want me to leave? You think I am so terrible? Fine, I will leave now." He grabbed his coat. He did not bother with his bedroll. "Eli, no!" she cried, her anger vanishing, replaced by instant, cold panic. "It is a blizzard. You will die." "Maybe that is better," he shouted back. "Better than being him? Better than being here, watching you look at me like I am him." He threw open the door. The storm roared into the room. A white, screaming beast. He walked straight into it. "Eli!" The wind snatched the door from her hand. Slamming it wide open, she screamed his name again. He was gone. The whiteout was total. He had vanished as if he had never been. She fought the storm to get the door shut. The bar dropped. The silence in the cabin was terrifying. It was just her, and the howl of the wind. An hour passed. She paced. Every gust of wind was his ghost. He will come back. He will realize it is suicide. 2 hours. The storm grew worse. The light outside was fading into a milky, gray dusk. He was not coming back. She had done it. She had accused him of being her monster, and she had pushed him out into a storm that would kill him. "I am the killer," she thought. A cold, dull realization. The town was right all along. She could not wait. She pulled on her boots, her coat. She grabbed the coil of rope from the shed, which he had so neatly hung. She tied one end to the porch rail. She took the lantern, though she knew it was useless. She plunged into the storm. The cold was a physical blow. The wind knocked her flat. She got up, clinging to the rope, screaming his name. "Eli! Eli!" The wind ripped the sound from her throat. She could not see her own hand in front of her face. She let the rope out, walking, stumbling, toward the creek. It was the only landmark. He would have followed the creek. She fell, the snow over her waist. She was sobbing, the tears freezing instantly to her face. "Please, please, God, do not take him." She found the end of her rope. She was out of line. She had to go on without it or go back. She untied it from her waist, letting it fall. She would find him, or she would die with him. She stumbled down the small embankment, feeling for the creek bed, and she fell over something. It was him. He was a dark shape, half buried in a drift, collapsed against the trunk of a big cottonwood. He was not moving. "Eli!" She clawed the snow off him. His face was white. Ice caked his eyelashes, his mustache. She put her hand to his cheek. He was so cold. "No," she wept. "No, you do not. You do not get to do this." She shook him. "Eli, wake up." A low moan. He was alive. "Get up!" she screamed, pulling at his coat. "You have to get up." He was a dead weight. "Cold," he mumbled. "Just sleep." "No, you are not sleeping." She slapped his face, a hard, stinging blow. His eyes fluttered. "You promised. You stay. You hear me? Stay." She got her shoulder under his arm. She pulled. He was too heavy. She fell. She tried again. Pure adrenaline. Pure terror. She dragged him. He stumbled, fell. She dragged him again. It was a foot, then another. She was sobbing, weeping, screaming at him, at the storm, at herself. "You are not leaving me. I will not be alone again. You stay. You promised. You stay with me." She did not know how she did it. It was not strength. It was pure, primal will. She dragged him, yard by yard, back toward the house, a faint orange smudge in the white dark. She got him onto the porch. He collapsed. She fell beside him, gasping. She crawled to the door, pulled the bar, and dragged him over the threshold, into the house. She slammed the door and dropped the bar, sealing the storm outside. They lay on the floor, two half-frozen creatures, gasping in the sudden, warm quiet. He was barely conscious. Clara scrambled to her feet. She tore at his frozen coat, his shirt. They were stiff as boards. She found the knife he had been sharpening and cut them from his body. His skin was a frightening blue-white. He was shivering so violently his teeth chattered. She dragged him to the hearth, piling blankets on him. It was not enough. He was too cold. She looked at her bed. With the last of her strength, she got him to his feet. Half carried, half dragged him to her room. She threw him onto the mattress and piled every quilt, every blanket in the house on top of him. He was still shivering. He would not stop. Clara, her own clothes wet and freezing, tore them off. She did not hesitate. She slid under the mountain of blankets, into the bed, and wrapped her own body around his, pressing her warmth against his icy back. She held him, her arms locked around his chest, her legs tangled with his, forcing her heat into him. "You stay," she whispered, her lips against his frozen ear. "You just stay. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Just stay." She felt a shudder go through him. It was not a shiver. It was a single, gasping breath. His hand, clumsy and half-frozen, found hers under the blankets and gripped it. He did not speak, but he held on, and outside, the blizzard raged. He did not die. Clara held him through that first terrible night, her own body shivering, then warming, then transferring its desperate heat into his. The blizzard screamed outside, but inside the small bedroom, there was only the sound of their breathing, ragged and shallow. She did not sleep. She just held on, as if her grip alone could keep his soul from slipping out into the white. By morning, the wind had quieted, but Eli was burning. The cold had gone too deep. It had settled in his lungs, and the fever took him. He was in her bed for 4 days. He was not the strong, silent man who had fixed her fence. He was a child, weak and lost, his skin dry and hot, his lips cracked. He did not know where he was. Clara nursed him. She was no longer afraid. The fight, the storm, his near death, it had burned away all the old fears, all the town's whispers. There was only this. She melted snow for water. She boiled the last of her potatoes in thin broth from a smoked ham hock, forcing the weak liquid between his lips. She bathed his face with a cool cloth. He thrashed in the grip of the fever. He was not in her house. He was somewhere else, somewhere dark and cold. He was on a prison road, or in a war. "Martin," he groaned, his hands clenching the quilt. "Get down! Martin, the wire! They are by the wire! Get down!" Clara paused, the cloth in her hand. "I told them," he mumbled, his eyes squeezed shut. Seeing a horror she could not. "I told him not to ride the line, not in the open." He went quiet. Then a low, animal sound of pain came from his chest. "Shot! He is shot! Martin! Oh, God! Martin!" He was weeping, a dry, scraping sound from a man who had forgotten how. "It is my fault," he whispered to the shadows. "He was my brother, my younger brother. I was supposed to. I could not prevent it. I could not stop it." Clara sat and listened to the confession, the guilt that was heavier than any prison sentence. He, too, was haunted by a death. He, too, carried a failure that had defined him. She saw the scar on his shoulder and understood it was not just a mark, but a memory. She dipped the cloth in the cool water and gently wiped his face. "Shh," she whispered. "It is all right. Eli, you are safe. You are here." He did not hear her. He just turned his head into the pillow and mumbled his brother's name, over and over, until a fitful, exhausted sleep finally took him. On the 5th day, the fever broke. He woke up, and his eyes were clear. They were gray and weak, but they were his. He looked around the room. He saw the curtains, the small dresser. He felt the soft mattress beneath him. He looked at Clara, who was dozing, exhausted, in the chair beside the bed.
"Clara!"
He rasped. Her head snapped up. He tried to sit. A wave of dizziness hit him so hard he fell back against the pillows, ashamed of his own weakness. I should be on the floor," he whispered. "You will do no such thing," she said. Her voice was firm, the voice of a woman who had dragged a man from a blizzard. It was not the voice of the frightened widow he had met. "You will stay. You will drink this broth. You will not move until I say you can." He was too weak to argue. He did a simple, unheard-of thing. He obeyed. The days that followed were quiet. The snow was still deep, the world muffled and white. The silence in the cabin returned, but it was a different silence. It was not charged, and it was not empty. It was the quiet of a sick room. Eli drifted. He would wake, drink what she gave him, and fall back asleep. In the long hours in between, he would stare at the ceiling, and she could see him thinking. She could see the ghosts gathering, the sheriff, the blizzard, his brother. She saw him retreating back into that dark, quiet place inside himself, the one he had lived in for 4 years. She felt a panic. She had not pulled him from the snow just to lose him to the shadows. She had to keep him here, grounded. She looked around the room. There was her mother's Bible, and on the shelf, her late husband's old farm ledgers. She picked up a ledger. She sat in the chair, opened the book, and cleared her throat. 1869, she read, her voice clear and steady in the quiet room. March 1st, 1 barrel of salt, $2. March 3rd, bought 1 new axe handle, 50 cents. Eli turned his head on the pillow, looking at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. She did not look up. She just kept reading. March 10th, sold 3 chickens, $1. March 12th, weather turned warm, mended south fence. She read the boring, simple facts of a life. She read about the cost of seed, the price of a hog, the mending of a roof, the day the creek flooded. It was the plainest, most earthbound language she knew. "Why are you reading that?" he finally whispered, his voice rough. "Because it is real," she said, her eyes still on the page. "It is not the storm. It is not fever. It is just the ground. It is the work. It is something to hold on to." He closed his eyes. He did not speak again. He just listened. He listened to the steady rhythm of her voice, naming the solid things of the world. When she finished the ledger, she picked up the Bible. She did not read the parts about vengeance or sin, or the judgment of God. She turned to the Psalms. "The Lord is my shepherd," she read. "I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." She read of the lilies of the field and of the seasons. "To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven, a time to be born, and a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up that which is planted." Her voice was an anchor. It was a rope, pulling him, hand over hand, out of the dark water and back onto the solid, sun-baked land. The snow began to melt. First, it was just the sound, a constant dripping from the eaves. Then, the windows cleared, revealing a world of blinding white, the sky a sharp, painful blue. The world was returning. Eli was stronger. He was able to get out of the bed, wrapped in a quilt, and sit by the fire. He was still weak, but the fever was gone. He was quiet, humbled. The fight, the anger, the accusation that he was frank, it had all been washed away by the storm and the fever. They were just 2 people, sitting in a small, warm room, while the world thawed around them. One morning, Clara was outside, chipping at the ice that still sheeted the porch. Eli was standing in the doorway, breathing the sharp, clean air. They heard it at the same time. A cry, faint, thin, and desperate. It came from the barn.
What is that?
Clara said. Eli looked toward the barn. The mare. They walked through the deep, slushy snow. The barn was cold and damp. The smell of wet hay thick in the air. Her old mare was in her stall, restless and pawing the ground. In the next stall, half hidden in the sodden hay, was a heap. It was a calf. It was tiny, its brown and white fur matted, shivering so hard it seemed to be vibrating. It was trying to stand on legs that buckled like wet paper.
It is not hers,
Clara whispered, looking at her mare. Eli looked around. In the far corner, almost buried in a drift that had blown in through a crack, was the stiff, frozen body of a stray cow. It must have sought shelter in the storm, calved, and died. The mother is dead, Eli said. He looked at the tiny, shivering creature. It is premature. It is too weak. It will not make it. Clara. It will, Clara said. It was not a hope. It was a command. She looked at the pathetic, hopeless creature, and she saw herself. She saw Eli collapsed in the snow. She ran to the house, Eli leaning on the door frame for support, watched her. She came back with old, dry blankets. She went to her mare, the horse, usually so skittish, let Clara lean against her, pressing her head into her flank, and stroke her until a little milk came. She dipped her fingers in the thin milk and pushed them into the calf's mouth. The tiny creature did not have the strength to suck. It just shivered, its eyes dull. It is no use, Eli said, his voice full of the world's hard facts. Let it go.
No.
Clara's voice was fierce. She threw the blankets aside. She scooped the calf up into her arms. It was a pathetic, lightweight bundle of bones and cold fur. She carried it out of the barn, through the snow, and into the house. She laid it on the hearth, on the old rug where Eli had slept. She rubbed it dry with a rough sackcloth, her motions hard and fast, trying to force life into it. She warmed the milk, mixed it with a spoonful of molasses, and dipped a rag in it. She forced the rag into the calf's mouth, squeezing drops onto its tongue. Eli had followed her. He stood in the parlor, wrapped in his quilt, and he watched. He watched this woman, who had fought a blizzard for him, now fighting that same relentless cold for this one hopeless creature. For an hour, she worked. The calf was limp. It seemed to be sinking. No, Clara whispered, rubbing its tiny chest. You live. You hear me? You will live. The calf gave a sudden, shuddering gasp. It let out a tiny, weak bleat, its head wobbling, tried to lift. Clara sat back on her heels. She was covered in muck, her hair falling into her face, her hands raw, and she smiled. It was the first true, unguarded smile Eli had ever seen on her face. It was like the sun coming out. It will live, she said. It was a promise. It was a newborn hope. The thaw revealed the roads, thick rivers of mud, but passable. They were out of everything, flour, salt, coffee. I have to go to town, Clara said, dreading it. I will go, Eli said. He was walking on his own now, his strength returning. No, the sheriff. He said he would run you in. He will have to, Eli said, his voice quiet. I am not letting you go alone. Not after. He did not finish. Not after what they said. He was not asking, he was telling. They rode the mare. Clara sat in the saddle. Eli walked beside her, his hand on the horse's flank. The mud sucked at his boots, but his pace was steady. When they reached Main Street, the town stopped. It was as if someone had called a halt. Mrs. Gable, coming out of the mercantile, stopped with her hand in the air. Two men by the saloon, who had been laughing, went silent. They stared. Clara Miller, the widow, the outcast, the woman who may have killed her husband. She was not alone. She was with him, the convict, the drifter. He walked beside her, his scarred face hard as granite, his eyes missing nothing. He looked protective. He looked like he belonged there. Clara felt the heat of 100 stares. The old shame washed over her. She wanted to turn the mare and ride. "Keep your head up," Eli said, his voice low, not looking at her. "You have done nothing wrong." She straightened her back. She held her head high. She slid off the mare at the mercantile. Eli tied the horse to the rail. The entire street watched as they walked, side by side, up the steps and into the store. The silence inside was worse. It was thick and suffocating. Mr. Gable, the proprietor, was behind the counter. He stopped weighing beans and just stared. "I need flour," Clara said. Her voice was clear, and it did not tremble. 20 pounds, and salt, and coffee." "Mister." Gable looked from her to Eli. Eli looked back. He did not look threatening. He just looked, and in his stillness, there was a power that made Mr. Gable break eye contact. "Yes, ma'am." "Mister," Gable mumbled, turning to get the flour. They were paying, the coins heavy on the counter, when the door swung open hard, slamming against the wall. It was Mrs. Davies. She looked as if she had run all the way from the preacher's house. Her face was purple with righteous rage. "Clara," she said, her voice shaking. "I must speak with you, at once, outside." Clara calmly put the last of her coins on the counter. She turned. "You can speak to me here, Mrs. Davies." The preacher's wife gasped, her fury making her reckless. "I warned you. I warned you what this town would think. And now you flaunt it. You flaunt your sin in our faces. You bring this criminal," she spat the word, "into our town, into a decent store." Eli tensed, his body going rigid. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low growl, "this is not your concern." "You be silent, Mrs. Davies shrieked, pointing a gloved finger at him. "You have no place here. You have no voice." She turned back to Clara, her eyes blazing. "He must be removed. I told you, he is an affront to God. He is a danger to our homes. You will send him away, or the town will—" The entire store was watching. This was the judgment. This was the end. Clara looked at the angry, pinched face of the preacher's wife. She looked at Mr. Gable, who was pretending to wipe the counter, his eyes wide. She looked at the other shoppers, their faces a mix of fear and hungry curiosity. Then she looked at Eli. He was standing straight, his jaw tight, his scar pale. He was ready. He was ready to be blamed. He was ready to be cast out. He had been doing it his whole life. He was ready to take the fall for her, just as he had for his friend, Jed. And something inside Clara, something that had been tied to a bedpost for years, snapped. "No," Clara said. The word was quiet. It was cold as ice. It cut right through the high-pitched fury of the preacher's wife. "Mrs. Davies's mouth dropped open. What did you say?" "I said, no," Clara repeated, taking one step toward her. "I will not." You defy me? You defy the church? You defy this town?" "I defy you," Clara said, her voice rising, gaining a strength she did not know she possessed. "You came to my house. You spoke of decency. You spoke of sin. But you never spoke of it when Frank was alive. Did you?" The store went dead silent. "You did not visit me then." Clara's voice rang out, sharp and clear. "You did not come to my house when he was breaking my chairs. You did not come when he was full of whiskey and rage. You did not come, Mrs. Davies, when he tied me to my own bedpost and left me standing all night until I bled." A collective gasp went through the room. Mrs. Gable dropped her basket. That is a vile, terrible lie, Mrs. Davies sputtered, her face ashen. "Is it?" Clara was shaking now, not with fear, but with a pure, clean rage. "You all knew. You all whispered. You all crossed the road to avoid the bruises. You let me freeze, just like he did. You let me live in that broken house, and you called it God's test." She turned and pointed, her hand shaking, at Eli. "This man," she said, her voice breaking with the truth of it. "This criminal. He fixed my roof. He chopped my wood. He mended my fences. He walked into a blizzard to save my life, and when I was too foolish to save myself, he nearly died. He is a better man, a better Christian than any of you." She turned back to the counter and grabbed her sack of flour. "You want to talk about sin, Mrs. Davies? You look in your own mirror. You want to talk about decency? You go home and learn what it means. Now, get out of my way." She pushed past the stunned, speechless woman. Eli, his face a mask of shock and a fierce, burning pride he had never known, grabbed the other sack and followed her. They walked out of the store, down the steps, and left the entire town silent on the boardwalk. They did not speak the whole way home. The silence was absolute. The sun was setting, bleeding purple and red across the muddy fields. The air was cold, but the thaw had come. They put the supplies away. Eli fed the mare. Clara checked on the calf, which she had named Hope. It was sleeping soundly by the fire. She started supper. He sat at the table. The air was different. The fight in the store had been a reckoning. She had claimed him. He had stood by her. "You should not have done that," he said quietly, his voice rough. "Why not?" she asked, not turning from the stove. "It was the truth." "You made yourself an outlaw. Clara," he said, "they will never let you back in. Not now." "Let them," she said, turning to face him. "I was never in to begin with." He stood up, pacing the small kitchen, agitated. "You do not understand. They will come for me. The sheriff, Mrs. Davies will make him. They will run me out." "Let them try." "Clara!" He stopped, his hands clenched. "You do not know what you have done. You have tied yourself to me, a man with nothing, a convict, a man who mumbles about his dead brother." "I know what I have done." She stood up and faced him. The memory of that first desperate night, the bargain she had made, hung between them. "That night," she said, her voice trembling, but her gaze steady. "I told you I wanted a child. It was true. I was lonely. This house was so empty. I just wanted warmth. I wanted a life." "Clara, do not," he whispered, his face tight with pain. "A child. I am not the kind of man who—" "But I was wrong," she said, stepping closer to him, stopping just inches away. "I was wrong about why I do not just want a child. Eli, I do not want one out of loneliness, or to fill an empty house." She looked him straight in the eye, her hands hanging loose at her sides. "I want one," she whispered, "with you." He froze. He looked at her as if she had struck him. He had been told he was a thief, a convict, a failure, his father's son. He had taken the fall for another man's children. He had never, in his entire hard life, been wanted. "You do not know what you are saying," he breathed, shaking his head. I am broken land. Clara, there is nothing good planted in me." "So am I," she said. She reached up, her hand steady this time, and touched his face. She did not touch the scar. She touched his jaw, the rough stubble. "But we are not Frank. We are not your father. We are not the ghosts. We are just us, and I am not asking you to stay. I am asking you to be." He looked at her, and the prison walls he had lived behind for so long, the hardness, the practiced stillness, it all just crumbled. He leaned his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. "Clara," he breathed. The name was a prayer. This time, it was not a desperate, drowning bargain. It was not a fight against the cold. He led her to the bed, in the warm firelight. He undressed her, and his hands were not rough. They were reverent. He kissed the old, faded bruises on her arms, as if to erase them. She touched the scars on his chest and shoulder, and she was not afraid. When they came together, it was quiet, it was warm, it was tender, it was two broken, lonely people choosing to be whole, together. It was a time to plant. And as they moved, she did not weep or cry out. She whispered his name, over and over, like a shield. Eli, Eli, Eli! She was not just saying it, she was claiming it, she was protecting it. In the days that followed, a new peace settled on the homestead. The town left them alone, stunned into silence by Clara's stand. Eli did not move his bedroll back to the hearth. He stayed. One evening, he brought the old, mended rocking chair into the center of the room, the one Frank had broken, the one he had glued. "The glue is weak," he said, as if explaining himself. He took it apart, piece by piece. He had found some good, cured pine in the barn. He began to build a new chair. He worked by the fire, his big hands, which could be so rough, moving with surprising gentleness. He sanded the wood until it was smooth as silk. He did not use the old design. This chair was sturdier, the arms were wider, the runners were perfectly curved. It took him 3 nights. When he was finished, he set it by the fireplace, right where the old one had been. "It is for you," he said gruffly, not looking at her. For sitting by the fire." He did not say for the baby. He did not say for the future. He did not have to. The chair was a promise. It was a cradle. It was a future, built with his own hands. That night, Eli fell asleep in her bed, his breathing deep and even, for the first time in his life. He was not on the run. He was home. Clara lay beside him for a long time, watching him in the faint moonlight. Then she rose, wrapping a quilt around her shoulders. She went to the parlor. The calf, Hope, was asleep in its box. The fire was a bed of warm, red coals. She sat in the new chair. She placed her hands on the smooth, wide arms. She began to rock, slowly, back and forth. The motion was steady, solid. She stared at the chair he had built. She stared at the man sleeping in her bed. She stared at the future, a tiny, fragile thing, just like the calf, and she willed it to live. She rocked, and she waited. The new chair changed the room. It sat by the hearth, not as a piece of mended history, but as a solid, waiting promise. Eli had built it, and in building it, he had laid a foundation. The cabin, which had been a cold shell of Frank's failures, was finally, truly, Clara's. It was theirs. The calf, Hope, grew stronger. She was a fixture by the fire, a small, breathing symbol of what they had pulled from the cold. A fragile peace settled over the homestead. It was the peace of hard work and shared meals, of quiet nights where they lay in the dark, not speaking, but listening to each other's breathing, a sound that meant not alone. This peace, in this Wyoming town, could not last. It was a fragile skin over a deep wound, and the town was determined to break it open. They came on a Tuesday. The mud had dried, and the prairie was showing the first faint, pale green of a hard-won spring. Clara was in the small garden patch, turning the cold soil. Eli was near the barn, resetting the last of the corral posts, his movement strong and sure again. Clara heard the horses first. It was not one rider. It was a group. She stood up, the trowel falling from her hand, her heart seizing. 5 men rode into the yard. They were not law. They were a posse. Mr. Gable from the mercantile was in front, his face set and hard. With him was his brother, the blacksmith, and 2 ranchers she recognized, men who had drunk with Frank. They were armed, and lagging just behind them, as if to make it all official, was Sheriff Brody. Eli saw them. He did not run. He did not reach for the axe. He just stopped working and stood very, very still, his hands loose at his sides. He had seen this scene before. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "go inside. Bar the door." "I will not," she said, walking to stand beside him. She was trembling, but she stood. "Mr." Gable reined in his horse, his eyes sweeping over the new fence, the mended roof, and landing on Clara. "Clara, we are here for him."
"He has done nothing,"
Clara said, her voice sharp. "You have no business on my land." "He is a danger," the blacksmith said, spitting. "A convict, a man who raises his hand to decent folk. We do not want his kind here." Eli stepped forward, his body shielding Clara. "I am no danger to you. I have kept to this property. I have troubled no one." One of the ranchers, a hard-faced man named Sykes, laughed. "Troubled no one. You have troubled the whole town. We know what you are, and we know what she is." He looked at Clara, his eyes crawling over her, lingering on her stomach. "We have heard the whispers. Clara." Sykes sneered. "We heard what you shouted in the store. We know you are carrying his sin, that you are expecting his child." Clara felt as if he had slapped her. That fragile, secret hope, spoken aloud in anger, now felt like an accusation. She was shaken, but she did not back down. She met his gaze.
"If I am, it is my business,"
she said, "and God's. It is not yours." "It is our business," Gable said, his voice rising. "When a woman brings a wolf into the fold, when she brings a man like that," he gestured to Eli, "into our town." "Gentlemen," Sheriff Brody said, his voice lazy, full of relish. "The man has been warned. Eli, I told you to leave. You are trespassing." Eli knew the script. He knew how this ended. He had seen it with his brother, Martin. He had seen it in prison. Violence was a language he did not want to speak, but it was the only one they understood. Still, he had to try. For her. He raised his hands slowly, palms out. "There is no need for this. I will go. You do not need to trouble the lady. I will gather my things." "See?" Brody grinned, as if he had won. "Smart man." But Sykes was not satisfied. He was drunk, if not on whiskey, then on his own righteousness. He had hated Frank, but he hated Clara more for surviving him, for defying them, for choosing this outsider. He slid off his horse and took a step toward Clara. Eli moved, but the sheriff's hand went to his pistol. "Stay put, convict," Brody warned. Sykes looked Clara up and down, his lip curled. "She is no lady." He took another step. He hawked and he spat. The thick glob of tobacco juice landed in the dust, inches from her boot. It was a violation. It was the town spitting on her home, on her child. "She is just a common harlot." Sykes slurred, his face red with hate. A soiled woman, selling herself to a drifter for a winter's work. It was not the word, it was the spit, it was the look in his eyes, it was the sound of Mrs. Davies's voice, of Frank's laugh. Eli did not shout, he did not warn. He was a prison gate slamming shut. He was 4 years of silence, and a lifetime of being called a failure. He was the brother who had not been fast enough. He moved. He dropped his hands, and in one smooth, practiced, terrible motion, he hit Sykes in the face. It was not a barroom swing. It was a straight, hard punch that landed with the sound of wet boards breaking. Sykes went down. He did not get up. He just lay in the dirt, his nose a red ruin, blood pumping onto the dry ground. For a second, there was total silence. The other men were too stunned to move. Then the blacksmith yelled, "He hit him!" and rifles were cocked. "Eli, no!" Clara screamed. But Eli just stood over Sykes, breathing hard, his right hand split open and bleeding. He looked at the men, his eyes burning with a cold fire that made them hesitate. Sheriff Brody was the first to recover. He was grinning. This was the gift he had been waiting for. He drew his pistol and leveled it at Eli's chest. Well, now, that is what I was waiting for. Assaulting a citizen, resisting the law. I knew you would show your true colors. He pulled rope from his saddle. Turn around, convict. Put your hands behind your back. Eli did not resist. He had already lost. He had proven them right. He turned, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and let the sheriff bind his wrists. He looked at Clara, and his eyes said,
I am sorry. I am him. I am my father. You cannot take him,
Clara cried, running forward.
He was defending me. You heard what that man said. You saw what he did.
I did not see a thing, Brody said, yanking the ropes tight. Except your man here, with his prison ways. Nearly kill Mr. Sykes. That is all I will be testifying to. They pulled Eli onto a horse. Sykes was groaning, his friends helping him up, his face a mask of blood. You ride back to town. Clara, Brody said, his voice hard. You ride back and you tell everyone what happens when you side with trash. He will see the circuit judge in the morning, and he will be going back to prison. They rode away, leaving her alone in the yard, the dust settling around the dark, spreading stain of blood. For a full minute, she did not move. The old Clara would have crumpled. The old Clara would have gone inside, barred the door, and wept. This Clara was different. This Clara had pulled a man from a blizzard. This Clara had faced down Mrs. Davies. She ran to the barn. She threw the saddle on her mare, her hands shaking, but not with fear, with rage. She checked on Hope, gave her water. She barred the farmhouse door. She did not know when she would be back. She rode for town. She rode hard. By the time she arrived, it was dark. The town was buzzing. The story had already spread, twisted and ugly. Eli, the mad convict, had attacked an innocent man in a fit of rage. She did not go to the preacher. She did not go to the sheriff's office. She needed a weapon. She needed a lawyer. There was only one Mr. Abernathy, and he would be at the saloon. She tied the mare to the rail and, without hesitating, pushed through the swinging doors of the Golden Nugget. The piano stopped. A man dropping a poker chip let it clatter to the floor. The entire saloon, miners, ranchers, merchants, turned and stared. A woman did not enter this place, especially not this woman. She ignored them. She saw Abernathy at a back table, a green visor on his head, a glass of whiskey at his elbow. He was playing cards with Mr. Gable, who was already cleaned up and looking smug. Mr. Abernathy, Clara said. Her voice was steady. Abernathy looked up, annoyed.
Mrs. Miller, this is hardly the time or place.
I am in a game. They have Eli, she said. At the jail. Sheriff Brody arrested him for assault. They are holding the hearing in the morning. Abernathy sighed, laying his cards down. Clara, I heard the man is a convict. He broke Sykes's nose. There is no defense for that. He was defending me. He was provoked. Provocation is not a defense, not for a man like him, Abernathy said, eager to get back to his game. There is nothing I can do. You will find something, Clara said. Ma'am, I require a retainer, $50. He named an impossible sum, just to get rid of her. The saloon was listening, grinning. Gable snickered.
She does not have 50 cents. Abe, send her home.
Clara took a deep breath. She looked at the faces, full of mockery and judgment. I do not have $50 in cash, she said, her voice ringing out in the smoky room. But I have my farm. Abernathy stopped shuffling. Gable's smirk faded.
It is 160 acres,
Clara said, projecting her voice to every man in the room.
The house is mended. The roof is new. The fences are strong. It has a good well. It is worth $500.
What are you saying? Abernathy asked, his eyes suddenly sharp. I am saying I will sell it. Tonight. To any man in this room who will pay Mr. Abernathy's fee and give me the rest, I will sign the deed. Right now." The room was silent. This was not a bluff. This was a woman betting her entire world. Abernathy held up a hand. He was a lawyer, and he smelled a deal. No need to be hasty." He stood. "You are willing to put up the farm?" "I am," Clara said. "Very well." He looked at the men, then back at her. "I will take the case. You will sign the deed over to me as collateral. If I win, and he walks free, you owe me my $50. If I lose, and he goes to prison, I keep the farm." "Done," Clara said, without blinking. She had just gambled her land, her home, and her future on a whiskey-drinking lawyer and the decency of a town that had shown her none. She left the saloon. The men who had been sneering now just stared, a new, strange look in their eyes. Some looked at her like she was mad. A few looked at her like she was a saint. She walked straight to the jailhouse. It was a squat stone building, cold and dark. Sheriff Brody was inside, his boots on his desk, a cigar in his mouth. "I want to see him," she demanded. "No visitors for prisoners." Brody grunted. "I am a material witness," Clara said, the legal phrase feeling strange on her tongue. "And Mr. Abernathy is his lawyer. He will be here in 1 minute. You cannot keep me out." Brody cursed, but he knew she was right. He grabbed his keys and led her to the back room. There were 2 cells. Eli was in the far one. He was sitting on the narrow cot, his head in his hands. His knuckles were swollen and dark with dried blood. The sound of the key in the lock made him look up. His face, when he saw her, was a mask of pain and shame. "Clara," he whispered, standing. "You have to go home. Bar the door. Forget about me. I am done." "I am not leaving you," she said. "You should," he said, gripping the bars. "I failed. I proved them right. I am just like my father. I am what they say I am." "No," she said. She walked right up to the cell. Brody had gone back to his office, leaving the door open so he could listen. "You are the man who protected me. You are the man who built my chair. You are the man who stayed." He shook his head, looking down at his ruined hands. "Clara, I cannot go back to prison. I cannot." "You will not." She saw the stool by the wall. She dragged it over to the bars and sat down. "I hired Mr. Abernathy." Eli let out a short, bitter laugh. "With what? Hope?" "The farm," she said quietly. He looked up, his eyes wide with horror. "You what? No, Clara, you cannot. It is just a broken nose. I will serve 60 days. I will serve 6 months. It is just time. It is not your home. You cannot lose your home for me." "It is not a home without you," she whispered, her voice fierce. "It is just a cold house full of ghosts. I will not lose you. Eli, I will not." He was speechless. He just stared at her, this woman who had just wagered her entire world for him, for a convict, for a man who had never been worth $1. Clara pushed her hand through the cold iron bars. "Take my hand." He hesitated, looking at his own bloody, swollen fist. "Take it," she commanded. Slowly, he uncurled his fingers and took her hand. His was rough, hers was small. They just held on. She would not leave. She put her head against the cold steel of the cell, and she held his hand. She would not let him go. She fell asleep that way, sitting on a hard stool in a cold jailhouse, her fingers laced with his through the bars, a guardian against the dark. The hearing was at 10 the next morning. The room was not a courtroom. It was the town hall, and it was packed. The whole town was there. Mrs. Davies was in the front row, her face a mask of triumph. Sykes was there, his face a swollen, purple and black mess, looking like the perfect victim. Judge Hemphill, the circuit judge, was a tired man who looked like he had seen everything and was impressed by nothing. He wanted this over with. Sykes testified first, his voice thick from his broken nose. He told a story of an unprovoked, savage attack. He is an animal, he finished, a mad dog that needs to be put down. The judge looked at Eli. "Mr. Eli, you have a response to this?" Eli stood. He was not in chains. Abernathy had argued that much. He insulted Mrs. Miller. I hit him. He looked at Clara, then back at the judge, and I would do it again. Abernathy winced. The judge sighed. This was open and shut. "I call Clara Miller," Abernathy said. Clara walked to the front. She was pale, but her eyes were clear. "Mrs. Miller," Abernathy said, "please tell the court what Mr. Sykes did that prompted this." "He rode onto my property, armed," Clara said, her voice clear and strong. "He threatened us. He accused me of things, and then he spat at me, and he called me a harlot." The room buzzed. "Mrs." Davies nodded, as if this proved her point. Judge Hemphill held up a hand. "Ma'am, I understand your distress, but vile words, while unfortunate, are not grounds for this level of assault." "No, Your Honor," Clara said. "It is not just the words. It is everything. It is this town." And she told him the truth. "For 10 years, she said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner, I have lived in silence. My husband, Frank Miller, was a respected man in this town. He was also a drunkard, and he was a violent man." The room went dead quiet. He used his fists. He broke my things. He broke me." She looked at the floor, then straight at the judge, her shame burning away, leaving only the cold truth. "He tied me to my bedpost, Your Honor. He left me standing, tied all night, while he went to the saloon. And this town knew." She looked at Gable, at Mrs. Davies. "You all knew. You saw the bruises. You heard the yelling. And you crossed the road. You looked away. You called me cursed. You whispered that I killed him. And you were glad of it. You left me to freeze in that house, alone." She turned and pointed to Eli, who was watching her, his face undone. "And then this man came, a stranger, a convict. He fixed my roof when no one else would. He chopped my wood. He mended my fences. He was respectful. He was kind. He saved my life in the blizzard. He is not a danger. Your Honor, he is the only decency I have known since I came to this valley." She was crying now, but her voice did not waver. "Mr. Sykes called me a harlot because I finally let a good man into my home. He called me that because I am carrying this man's child." A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Eli looked at her, his heart stopping. She had just claimed him, and their child, in front of all of them. "Eli did not just hit a man," Clara said, her voice ringing. "He defended his family. He defended his home. He defended me. That is not a crime. And if you say it is, then you are no better than the men who stood by and let my husband destroy me." She was done. She sat down, shaking. The room was divided. Some looked at her with pity, some with awe. Mrs. Davies looked at her with pure, unadulterated hate. Judge Hemphill rubbed his face. "This is a mess, Sheriff." Before he could rule, a voice from the back cut through the silence. "She is telling the truth." Every head turned. Old Mrs. Gideon, the town matriarch, a woman so old she was practically a monument, was standing up, her hands trembling on her cane. "I knew Frank Miller," she said, her voice thin but sharp as a needle. "He was a brute. His father was a brute before him. This town, we looked away. We did. We were cowards, all of us. We let that girl suffer." She looked at Clara, her ancient eyes sharp. "She has had enough pain. We have given her enough." She turned her gaze on Mrs. Davies. "Let the girl be. Let her love who she loves." The silence was profound. Mrs. Gideon had spoken. Judge Hemphill looked at Mrs. Gideon, at the divided room, at the bloody-faced Sykes, and at Eli.
Mr. Sykes,
the judge said, "You are a fool, and you got what you deserved.
Mr.
Eli, you are a hothead, and you are lucky you are not on your way back to prison. But in this case, I am siding with the old woman." He banged his gavel. "Case dismissed." Clara cried out, a sob of pure relief. She ran to Eli, and they held each other in the middle of the room, not caring who watched. Abernathy clapped Eli on the back.
"You owe me $50, Mrs. Miller."
They were laughing, crying, holding each other. Then Sheriff Brody stepped up, his face dark as a thunderhead. He had been humiliated.
"The judge may be a sentimental fool,"
Brody said in a low, venomous voice, "just for Eli and Clara. But I am the law in this county. This is my town."
"He was cleared,"
Clara said.
"He was,"
Brody agreed. "And now he is free to go." He smiled, a terrible, thin smile. "I want you out of my county. Eli, you have 1 week." "You cannot do that," Eli said, his body going tense again.
"I can, and I will. 1 week. If you are here after 7 days, the next stolen horse, the next broken window, it is on you. And next time, Eli, I will not arrest you. I will not bring you to a hearing."
He tapped the pistol at his hip. "Next time, I will just shoot you. Do you understand me?" The joy was gone. They had won everything. And they had lost it all. They had a home, but they could not stay. The week was a lifetime. It was a blur of hurried goodbyes to a place that had only ever given her pain. The victory in the town hall was a hollow, bitter thing, ringing in their ears against the sheriff's final threat. Brody was a man who kept his word. They had to go. The first person who came was, surprisingly, Mr. Abernathy. He was not there to collect his collateral. He brought a man with him. "This is Mr. Anderson," the lawyer said, standing on her porch. He looked different in the daylight, sober and professional. He and his wife, Sarah, are looking for a plot. He has cash. He is not from here. He does not care about town gossip. The Andersons were a young family from Ohio, their wagons stacked with dreams and their faces weary from the journey. They had 2 small children, a boy who hid behind his father's leg and a girl who stared at Clara with wide, curious eyes. Clara showed them the land. She showed them the mended roof, the strong fence, the deep well. Eli stayed back, chopping the last of the wood, his presence a silent, watchful shadow. "It is a good, strong house." "Mr. Anderson said, testing the porch step Eli had fixed.
"It is,"
Clara said. "It will keep you warm." It was Sarah, his wife, who made the decision. She walked into the parlor and saw the small calf, Hope, sleeping soundly by the cold hearth.
"Goodness,"
she breathed, kneeling.
"What is this?"
"Her name is Hope," Clara said.
"Her mother died in the blizzard. I could not let her go."
Sarah Anderson reached out a hand, and the calf, recognizing kindness, nudged her fingers. The woman smiled, a gentle, warm smile that reminded Clara of her own mother. "She will need a strong hand," Sarah said, looking up at Clara. "She will," Clara agreed. "And the land, it is hard land. It needs work." "We are not afraid of work," Mr. Anderson said. They bought it. They did not try to bargain. They paid the $500, minus the $50 Clara owed the lawyer. It was a stack of greenbacks and a small, heavy bag of coins. It was a fortune. It was their entire world. "We will take good care of her," Sarah promised, her hand still on the calf. "The house, the land, and hope." Clara nodded, the knot in her throat too tight to speak. She had saved the calf, and in return, the calf had saved her home, passing it to hands that would love it. The last day was the hardest. Eli was packing their few belongings onto a sturdy mule he had bought in town. He was quiet, his face set. He had lashed the rocking chair to the mule's pack saddle. It looked strange and awkward. A piece of a home balanced on the back of a beast of burden. It was the only furniture they were taking. Clara went into the bedroom one last time. The bed was bare, the mattress stripped. The post where Frank had tied her stood silent. She went to it and laid her palm flat against the wood. It was just wood, cold and smooth. It had no power over her anymore. She looked at Eli, who was waiting by the door, his hat in his hand. "It is done," she said. He nodded. He held out his hand. She took it. They mounted the mare. Clara sat in the saddle, and Eli walked beside her, his hand on the bridle, the mule tied behind. They did not look back. They rode past the edge of town, past the mercantile, past the preacher's house. No one came out. No one waved. The town held its breath, letting them go. A silent, collective sigh of relief. They rode west. They were heading toward a valley Eli had heard about years ago, before prison, before the range war that took his brother. A place in the Wind Rivers, he had told her. Green grass, a stream that runs all year. High mountains to break the wind. Few people. It sounded like heaven. It sounded like a myth. The first days were hard. The prairie was a vast, open, endless ocean of brown. The wind was relentless. It tore at Clara's bonnet and chapped their faces. At night, they were sore, their bodies aching from the ride and the walking. But they were not alone. They worked as a team. He made the camp, his movements economical, practiced from years of living rough. He would start the fire, his hands, which had broken a man's nose. Now, gentle as he coaxed a flame from dry grass and twigs. Clara would make the coffee and the simple meals, bacon, beans, hardtack. He was a good man on the trail. He knew where to find water. He knew how to read the clouds. He had been a drifter, but those skills were now the very things that kept them safe. He would check the mare's hooves every night. He would clean and oil their one rifle, his face grim in the firelight. He would mend her torn skirt with a rough awl and sinew, his large, scarred fingers surprisingly deft. She would read to him. She had brought the Bible. She did not bring the ledger. They were done with that life. She would read the Psalms, her voice a quiet comfort against the yip of coyotes and the low moan of the wind. He was teaching her. "You see that hawk?" He would point, his voice low. "That means there is water, or rabbits. He is hunting." She was learning to see the world as he did, not as a threat, but as a challenge, a place of hard facts and small, vital signs of life. On the fourth night, they stopped by a small, shallow creek. The land was flat, and the sky was so big it felt like it would swallow them. The stars were not the distant, cold stars of her old home. They were close, sharp as diamonds, a thick blanket of light. Clara was sitting by the fire, her hands wrapped around a tin mug of coffee. She was staring into the flames. Eli was on the other side, his bedroll already laid out. He was watching her. He had been watching her for an hour, his face unreadable in the flickering light. "It is a hard life, Clara," he said, his voice quiet, almost lost in the crackle of the fire. "This riding, sleeping on the ground. It is no life for a woman. It is no life for a—" He stopped. "It is no life for a child," she finished for him. She looked up. "It is a harder life back there, Eli, with them." He looked down, picking up a twig, breaking it in his fingers. "I have been thinking, that money, it is a good stake. We could get to a real city. Cheyenne, Denver. You could have a proper house, a doctor." "I do not want a proper house," she said. "I want that valley." "That valley," he said, his voice rough with an old, deep fear. "It might not be there. It might just be a story I heard, a drifter's dream. It might be nothing but rocks and wind. Then we will find another. she said, her faith in him absolute. He looked at her, and she saw the convict. She saw the boy who had lost his brother. She saw the man who had given up 4 years of his life because he did not think his own was worth as much as another's. "Clara," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "that night, when you asked me, you said you wanted a child." "I did," she said softly. "And you told the judge. You said you were carrying one." He could not look at her. He stared at the fire, at the red-hot embers. What if you are not? What if it was just a hope? What if the winter was too hard? What if it just does not come? He looked up, his gray eyes full of a terrible, naked vulnerability. "What will you want then, Clara, if I cannot even give you that?" He was afraid. He was afraid that he was not enough, that he was just the means to an end, that she had bet her whole farm on a man who was broken land, and that she, too, would find him barren. Clara did not hesitate. She set her mug down and moved around the fire. She knelt in the dirt in front of him, so he had no choice but to look at her. She put her cold hands on his knees. "Then I will have what I want," she said. He shook his head, confused. I wanted warmth. Eli?" she said, her voice clear and true as a bell. "I wanted a man who was kind. I wanted a man who would fix things, not break them. I wanted a man who would stand by me, not stand over me. I wanted a man to talk to in the quiet." She put her hand on his rough cheek, on the scar. "If the child does not come, I will be sad. But I will not be lonely, and I will not be poor." She leaned in, her forehead almost touching his. "I want you, Eli. I already have you. The rest is just waiting." He closed his eyes. The tension, the fear he had been carrying since the jailhouse, since the day he walked out of prison, left him in a single, shuddering breath. He had been given grace, he who had never asked for it. He said nothing. Words were not his way. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. He led her to her bedroll. She sat, and he moved behind her, sitting with his back against his saddle. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her back against his chest. Clara leaned into his solid warmth. She put her hands on her stomach. It was still flat, still a secret, still just a hope, but it felt different now. Eli covered her hands with his. His were large, rough, calloused, and stained from the trail. They were the hands of a worker, of a fighter. They were the hands of her husband. They sat there for a long time, watching the fire burn down to coals. They said nothing. The silence was not empty. It was not a void. It was full. It was full of the quiet creek and the breathing of the horses and the vast diamond sky. It was the sound of two people finally at peace, finally home. The seasons turned. The high passes of the Wind Rivers were choked with snow, so they wintered in a small, sheltered canyon, using the last of their money for flour and beans. It was a hard winter, but it was not like the others. They had the small tent, they had the fire, they had each other. Eli hunted and Clara mended, and they talked. They talked about his brother, Martin. They talked about her mother. They built a life out of words and shared warmth. And in the small, canvas tent, in the deepest part of the winter, Clara felt the first, faint, unmistakable flutter of a new life. When the spring thaw came, they moved on. Eli was stronger, his gaze sure he knew where he was going now. One day, they crested a high, rocky ridge. Eli stopped the mare. "There," he said. Clara looked down. It was not a myth. It was a valley. It was a bowl of the deepest, richest green she had ever seen. A river, clear and fast, cut through the center of it. Stands of aspen and tall pine dotted the landscape. The mountains on either side were high and strong, a fortress against the wind. It was empty, it was quiet, it was theirs. Months later, a small cabin stood in that green meadow. It was not a grand house. It was built of pine logs, chinked with mud and grass. The roof was sod, but it was thick, and it did not leak. It was a small, strong box, built by Eli's own hands. Dusk was falling. The air was cool, smelling of pine and damp earth. Inside, Clara was stirring a stew. She hummed, her body full and strong, her hair tied back in a simple knot. The cabin was warm, lit by the fire and a single candle. It smelled of venison and onions. Outside, a baby was crying. It was a thin, raw, demanding sound. Eli sat on the porch. He was in the rocking chair. They had carried it all those miles, a clumsy, beloved burden. He held a small, swaddled bundle in his arms, rocking it with a slow, steady motion. The baby quieted for a moment, its tiny red face screwing up, and then it let out another wail. Eli looked down at the child, his child, a boy. He whispered, his voice thick, so low only the baby could hear. You came from pain. You came from a hard place. You came from loneliness and fear. He pulled the blanket tighter. But you will grow in love. I promise you that. You will grow in love. The baby's cries softened to a small whimper. Clara came and leaned against the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. She watched them. She watched her husband, the ex-convict, the drifter, rocking their son in the chair he had built for her. The wind howled, high up on the ridges. It was the same Wyoming wind, vast and wild, a sound of loneliness and power. But it could not touch them here. It swept over the meadow, but the cabin stood strong, and inside, the fire was warm, and the stew was almost ready. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would love to hear from you. So please comment with where you are listening from so we can all connect. Be sure to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts on Clara and Eli's journey.